The conference chamber aboard the conclave vessel, Immutable Reasoning, was designed, like most things the Veil built, to be perfectly legible. Every surface served a communicative function. The lighting gradients indicated hierarchy. The curvature of the walls directed attention toward the center of the room where decisions were made and recorded and transmitted across 17 star systems in real time. Nothing in the room was accidental. Nothing in the room was unclear. The Veil had spent 400 years building a civilization on the principle that clarity was the highest virtue, and their architecture reflected that philosophy the way a mirror reflects a face, faithfully, completely, without interpretation. Madame Solis had been sitting in the center of that room for 6 hours. She was 34 years old, a mid-rank diplomatic liaison from the Interstellar Contact Division, which was itself a subdivision of an agency that most people back on Earth had never heard of and couldn't have found on an organizational chart without significant help. She had a background in linguistics, a minor in cognitive anthropology, and 11 months of field experience that had mostly involved filling out reports in rooms very similar to this one, though considerably less alien. She had been chosen for this assignment not because she was exceptional, but because she was available, had the right security clearance, and had demonstrated in a previous incident on a transit station near Proxima that she did not panic in situations where panic would have been completely understandable. She was not panicking now. She was, however, very aware that something had gone wrong. The veiled diplomat across from her, introduced formally as Third Mediator Esun Vor, whose title indicated approximately the same institutional rank as a senior undersecretary, which was several steps above her own, had not spoken in 40 minutes. He sat with the stillness that came naturally to his species, his elongated frame arranged in the formal posture of active deliberation, his secondary eyelids half closed. He was thinking, or he was waiting. With the veil, those two states were nearly indistinguishable from the outside, which was one of many reasons why human veil diplomatic engagements had historically produced a great deal of paperwork and very little progress. The reason for the silence was standing in the corner. His name, as far as Marin could determine, was not technically a name at all, but a designator, something like Reader 7, though the translation was imprecise. He was a veiled telepath, one of approximately 300 individuals across the entire conclave who possessed the neurological architecture necessary for direct cognitive interface. He was taller than Esun Vor, thinner, and he had not moved from his position near the eastern curve of the wall since the moment, approximately 40 minutes ago, when he had stepped back from Marin, folded his upper limbs against his chest in a gesture she did not recognize, and said, quietly and with evident difficulty, that he would not continue. The session had been arranged as a trust verification protocol. This was standard practice in veiled diplomatic proceedings when one party had no verifiable history with the conclave. No trading records, no prior treaty obligations, no genetic archive, no confirmed cultural lineage. The Veil did not sign agreements with unknowns. They couldn't afford to. At the scale they operated, a single miscalculation about the intentions of a new contact species could destabilize supply chains, migration corridors, or resource allocation frameworks across dozens of inhabited systems. So they read minds. Or rather, their telepaths conducted what the official translation called an integrity assessment. A structured cognitive scan that evaluated not thoughts exactly, but the emotional and intentional architecture underlying them. Whether someone meant what they said, whether they were capable of meaning what they said, humans had agreed to this because they had no leverage not to. The alternative to submitting to the assessment was no contact at all, which meant no trade access, no passage rights through conclave space, and no protection under the 4-team system security agreements that currently kept 3 separate predatory species from doing whatever they wanted in the outer transit corridors. Humanity needed the conclave. The conclave knew it. The assessment was, from their perspective, a formality, a process they had conducted with 47 other species without incident. a bureaucratic step that generated a confidence rating and allowed proceedings to continue. Marin had been chosen as the assessment subject because she was the ranking human official present. She had been briefed on the process. She had been told it was non-invasive, that it produced no lasting effects, that it took approximately 15 minutes, and that the telepath would not access specific memories or private thoughts, but only the deeper structural patterns, the cognitive signatures of honesty, fear, aggression, deception, cooperation. She had understood all of this. She had agreed to it calmly and sat down in the assessment chair, which was not really a chair, but a curved platform designed for veil physiology that she had to perch on somewhat awkwardly, and she had waited. Reader 7 had approached her. He had placed the first 2 fingers of his upper right limb against her temple, which was the point of physical contact required to establish interface with a species whose neurology had not been previously mapped. He had begun. 15 seconds later, he had removed his fingers. He had stood there for a moment without speaking. Then he had walked to the wall. Then the silence had begun. Asun Vor had asked him once in Veil whether he had sufficient data to generate a confidence rating. Reader 7 had said he did not wish to discuss it in these terms. Asun Vor had asked whether there had been a technical difficulty. Reader 7 had said there had not. Asun Vor had asked whether the assessment could be resumed. Reader 7 had said he would prefer not to resume it. Marin had understood none of this conversation in real time. It had been translated for her afterward by the chamber's passive translation system, which rendered Veil's speech into flat affect-neutral English approximately 4 seconds after it was spoken. She had sat on the curved platform and waited for someone to tell her what was happening. No one had. Now Asun Vor was looking at her with the particular quality of attention that she had come to associate over 11 months of field work with a senior official who was confronting a problem that did not fit inside any of the categories he had prepared for it. It was not hostile attention. It was not frightened attention. It was something more unsettling than either of those. It was the attention of a very careful, very experienced mind, working very hard to find a frame that worked, and not finding one. Liaison solis, he said, and the translation came 4 seconds later. I would like to ask you a question that falls outside the formal record of this session. Of course, Marin said. Are you in distress? She considered this for a moment. No, she said. Are you concealing distress? I'm a little uncomfortable, she said honestly. I don't know what happened, and I'm not sure what it means for the session. That's creating some uncertainty. But I'm not in distress. Asun Vor looked at Reader 7. Reader 7 had not moved from his position by the wall. His secondary eyelids were fully closed now, which Marin had learned was not a sign of sleep but of intensive internal processing. Reader 7, Asun Vor said with the particular inflection the translation system rendered as both a title and a question. Can you tell me what you encountered? The telepath was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, it was slowly, with the deliberateness of someone choosing each word the way you might choose footholds on uncertain ground. I can tell you what I encountered, he said. I cannot tell you what it means. That is acceptable. Another pause. Marin watched him. He had still not looked at her since stepping back. The human's cognitive architecture is not unusual, Reader 7 said. The structures of language, memory, intention, these are present in the expected configurations. The assessment was proceeding normally. I was mapping the emotional substrate, the honesty signatures, the cooperation indicators. He paused. And then I found something I did not expect. What did you find? She was aware of something I was not, Reader 7 said. Not a thought, not a plan, not a concealed intention. She was aware, at a level beneath language, of something about her own situation that she had not been told and that I had not considered. Asun Vor's secondary eyelids flickered. What was she aware of? That this might fail, Reader 7 said. that the assessment might not produce the result the conclave required, that her government had sent her here as the best available option, while knowing that their best available option might not be good enough, and that she had accepted this, not with resignation. There was no resignation in it. It was something I do not have an adequate designation for. He paused again. She knew the odds were unfavorable. She knew that her failure here would have consequences she could not fully predict and could not prevent. And she came anyway, and she sat in the chair, and she consented to the assessment, and she was, beneath all of that, genuinely calm, not performing calm, not suppressing fear, genuinely calm in a way that I could not. He stopped. Continue. Asen Vor said. I could not find the mechanism, Reader 7 said. In 47 assessments across 16 species, when a subject faces a situation of significant risk, personal, diplomatic, physical, the emotional substrate shows the expected patterns: fear suppression, compensatory confidence, strategic certainty. These are legible. I know what they feel like from the inside. But this was different. She was not suppressing anything. She was not suppressing anything. She was not certain of success. She held the possibility of failure openly, without suppressing it, and it did not disable her. I do not know how that is structured. I did not know how to read around it. And when I tried to move past it to the deeper cooperation indicators, I found that the same quality was present there too, at a more fundamental level, and He stopped again. You withdrew, Asunver said. I withdrew, Reader 7 confirmed. Yes, the chamber was very quiet. Marin had been listening to the translation with the practiced stillness she had developed for exactly these situations, moments in which something significant was being said about her in her presence, and in which any visible reaction might itself become significant. She kept her hands still in her lap. She kept her breathing even. She looked at a point on the curved wall approximately 40 degrees to the left of Reader 7's position, and she listened to the flat, affect-neutral English of the translation system render a veiled telepath's account of what he had found when he looked inside her mind, and she found, to her own mild interest, that what she felt was mostly curious. Third mediator, she said when the translation finished. May I ask a question? Esun Vora looked at her. You may. Is the session ended or suspended? A long pause. That is what I am currently determining. I understand, Marin said. I want you to know that I'm willing to continue the assessment if Reader 7 is willing to continue it. I don't know what he encountered, but I'm not hiding anything, and if what he found made the process difficult, I'd rather give him the opportunity to try again than have the session end on an incomplete result. She said it simply, without emphasis. It was just an offer. It was the practical thing to do, given the circumstances, and she genuinely meant it. And she knew that she genuinely meant it. And she also knew that what she was really doing was sitting in a room with two members of a species who could restructure her civilization's access to the stars based on what they decided in the next hour, and offering to let one of them reach back inside her mind, because the alternative, an incomplete assessment, a failed trust verification, a diplomatic session ending without a confidence rating, was worse. Reader 7 looked at her for the first time since withdrawing. The look lasted a long time. You are offering this voluntarily, he said. It came out as neither a question nor a statement, but something in between. An observation that was also a test. Yes, Marn said. You are aware that the process is, as I have just described it, difficult. I heard your description, Marin said. I gather it was difficult for you. I don't fully understand why, but I'd rather have you finish the assessment than not finish it. So yes, voluntarily. Reader 7 looked at Ason Vor. Ason Vor looked back at him with an expression that Marin, after 11 months of fieldwork, had learned to read as something close to permission. The telepath moved away from the wall. He crossed the chamber slowly and came to stand in front of her, and this time she could see his face clearly, the fine striations along his orbital ridge, the slight dilation of his primary eyes, the barely perceptible tension in the musculature around his mouth that the veil used to express the emotional state their language called something like standing at the edge of a new territory and choosing to step forward anyway. She noticed, distantly, that this was probably the same expression she had been wearing when she sat in the assessment chair the first time. She thought that was interesting. He placed his fingers against her temple again. This time, the assessment took 40 minutes. When it was over, Reader 7 stepped back again. But this time, he did not go to the wall. He stood in the middle of the chamber with his upper limbs at his sides, in the posture the veil used for formal testimony, spine straight, secondary eyelids open, gaze forward, and he spoke in a voice that was quieter than before and considerably more careful. "The assessment is complete," he said. "The confidence rating and cooperative intent is high. The indicators for deception, concealed aggression, and strategic misrepresentation are absent. The subject's stated intentions align with her underlying intentional structure at every measurable point." He paused. "I also want to note for the formal record that I have completed 47 assessments across 16 species, and I have never encountered what I encountered in this assessment." Asun Vor, who had moved to the recording station, looked up. "What specifically do you wish to note?" "The human has. The best translation I can offer is a capacity for holding contradiction without resolution," Reader 7 said. "She knows that she might fail. She knows that failure will have consequences beyond her ability to manage. She does not know whether this negotiation will succeed. She does not know whether her species will receive what it needs. She knows that the conclave is under no obligation to accommodate her, and that the assessment process itself represents an asymmetry of power that she cannot balance. She holds all of this. She does not suppress it or rationalize it away. It is all present, simultaneously, and she continues to function, and she continues to mean what she says, and she continues to offer what she can offer, and none of the contradiction dissolves it." Another pause. "When I went deeper, and she allowed me to go deeper, which I want to note she was not required to do, I found that this is not unique to her. It is structural. It is how the species is built. They are aware at a fundamental level of how precarious their existence is, and they proceed anyway, and the proceeding is not delusion, and it is not ignorance, and it is not the performance of certainty they do not have. It is something I cannot find a name for in any language I know." The chamber was very quiet for a very long time. As Swoonvor completed his notations, he arranged the formal components of the session record. He did the administrative work of a senior official processing an unusual result in a carefully designed system, and when he was done, he looked at Marin Solis, who was still sitting on the curved platform with her hands in her lap and her expression composed and her eyes very clear and very present. "Liaison Solis," he said, "the conclave will require time to review the assessment record before proceeding to treaty discussions. However, I can tell you informally, and I will note that this is informal, that the assessment has generated a satisfactory result for the purposes of this proceeding." "Thank you," Marin said. "I have one additional question, also informal." "Of course. How long have your people known about us?" Marin looked at him steadily. 17 years, she said. "And in those 17 years, knowing the gap between your capability and ours, knowing that initial contact carried risks you could not quantify, knowing that you might not be received favorably, your government chose to pursue contact anyway." "Yes," Marin said. "Why?" She thought about it for a moment. Not because she didn't have an answer, but because she wanted to give him the true one rather than the diplomatic one, and the true one required a moment to locate. "Because the alternative was knowing you existed and doing nothing," she said. "And we're not very good at doing nothing when there's something to be done." Asun Vor was quiet. Reader 7, still standing in formal testimony posture, had not moved. "I want to understand something," Reader 7 said. "What you just described, the willingness to accept significant risk for uncertain outcome, is this considered admirable among your people? Is it celebrated?" Marin considered. "Sometimes," she said. "Sometimes it's considered reckless. Sometimes both at once. But it happens consistently." "Yes," she said, "consistently, regardless of outcome." "Regardless of outcome," she confirmed. "We do it when it works, and we do it when it doesn't. Sometimes we do it because it probably won't work, and that, I know this is probably confusing, that sometimes matters to us too, that it might not work. That's sometimes the reason we try." Reader 7 looked at her with an expression she had no template for at all. Later, much later, after the session had formally concluded and the treaty framework had been submitted for conclave review, and Marin had sent her field report to the contact division and been informed that her report had been flagged for elevation to the director's attention, which had never happened to her before, she was sitting in the transit quarters assigned to the human delegation, which were small and slightly too cold and had lights that flickered at frequencies that made extended reading uncomfortable. She was making notes on her personal record, which was encrypted, which meant she wrote in it the way she actually thought rather than the way she reported. She wrote, "Reader 7 would not tell me, afterward, exactly what he found. I did not ask him directly because asking directly felt like pushing into something that should be left where it was. But he told me, when Azun Vor stepped away to transmit the session record, that in 47 assessments he had never had to stop. He told me this the way you tell someone something you are not sure you should be saying, carefully, watching to see how it lands. I think he was trying to understand if what he found in me was mine or ours." She paused. She thought. She wrote, "I think it's ours. I don't think I'm unusual. I think most people I know would have sat in that chair. I think most people I know have sat in that chair in one form or another, have known that the odds were wrong and the stakes were real and the outcome was uncertain, and have sat down anyway and waited for whatever was going to happen because waiting was the only thing they had left to offer. I think the Veil haven't encountered that before. I think they built a civilization precise enough that they can usually tell in advance whether something will work, and they only begin things that will work, which means they have never developed, whatever it is, the thing Reader 7 couldn't name." She sat with that for a while. Then she wrote, "He called it a capacity for holding contradiction without resolution. But I think what he actually saw was something simpler. I think he saw that we've always known we might not make it, as a species I mean. From the beginning we knew the odds were bad and the universe was large, and we were small and fragile and probably temporary. We knew before we had telescopes to see how large the universe was. We knew before we understood what temporary meant at the cosmic scale. Something in us always knew, and we started building cities anyway. And we started writing things down anyway. We started making art and having children and planting trees whose shade we would not live to sit under anyway. We've always been doing that, walking forward while holding clearly and without suppression the knowledge that the walk might not end where we hoped. I think when Reader 7 felt that, he felt the whole weight of it, not just mine, all of it at once. The full depth of what it means to be a species that has always known it was probably losing and has always kept going anyway. Not because it couldn't see the odds, but because seeing the odds clearly was never, for us, a reason to stop. I think that's why he pulled back the first time. Not because it was disturbing, because it was the saddest and most unfamiliar thing he had ever touched. And also, I think the most, I want to say formidable. Not in a military sense, the way a river's formidable, the way water moving without anger and without plan and without the capacity to be discouraged is formidable. You can build walls against it and it goes around the walls. You can dam it and it waits. You can reroute it and it finds the new low ground. It doesn't mean to be relentless. It simply doesn't know how to stop. She read what she had written. Then she closed the record and sat in the flickering light for a while, and she thought about nothing in particular, which was something she was quite good at when the circumstances called for it. 3 weeks later, the Conclave's formal review committee transmitted its recommendation. The treaty framework was approved. Human diplomatic liaison offices would be established at 4 Conclave transit stations. Passage rights through the outer corridors would be extended on a provisional basis, renewable annually. Resource access negotiations would begin in the following fiscal quarter. Attached to the official transmission, in a separate file that was not part of the formal record and that bore no author designation, was a single note in Veil that the translation system rendered as, "We have added the human trust verification record to our archive. It has been classified separately from all prior assessments. We have not yet determined what classification designation is appropriate. The archivist responsible for the designation has requested more time. This is unusual." The archivist has reviewed 47 prior records without requiring additional time. "We will update this notation when a determination is made." Marin read the note twice. Then she saved it to her personal record, next to her own notes, where she thought it belonged. She never found out what classification designation the archivist eventually chose. She asked twice through official channels, and both times the inquiry was acknowledged and not answered. She let it go. Some things she had learned were not meant to be resolved neatly. You could hold them clearly and completely and still not resolve them, and that was fine. That was, in its own way, something you could live with. She was quite good at that.